Right, so some more about this BMW project we got in. So this is an M4 S55 engine. It's had some work done to it in the past by WG Motorworks, and basically at the point where they've kind of maxed out the stock turbos, or hybrid turbos I think was on this car, and are looking for a more powerful option. Obviously hybrids can really only go so far because you've got the limitations of the stock size of turbine housing, and then the even with newer compressor covers and things like that, there's some limitations involved. So that's when realistically the only option is to go to an aftermarket type turbo, like a Garrett or an EFR, and that's what we're going to do on this. So the M4 S55 engine have twin turbos from standard, electronically wastegated, and that's kind of what we're going to stick with. So there are others I've seen, usually in the States, where they've got single turbos or big external wastegates and things like that, and it can all be done, but the issue becomes actually controlling the turbo, boost control and things like that, and you want things as much as possible to work with as many OEM parts as possible, and that really is important when it comes to the boost control. And if you can keep the stock engine ECU controlling the stock type electronic actuators to control the boost, it's going to be far more reliable, and you'll end up with most likely a far better performing kit. And I think a lot of the time those kind of fabricated kits, they either don't necessarily make the power they should make, or it's never really something that's kind of done time and time again. The results aren't necessarily always that either believable, or there's many downsides to kind of going away from that OEM boost control. It's just not the best way to do it. So we're going to try and do it with keeping the electronic actuators. So if we take a look underneath the car now, you'll see where the stock turbos are, how it all works, and then the space we've got to work with in terms of getting some Garrett turbos in there. So when Warren dropped the car off, he stripped it down partially, but I wanted to leave the subframe on. The original plan was just to whip subframe off because it's not a big job, but I think actually having seen it now, we can do all of the work and leave the subframe on. It might make prototyping a little bit more difficult, but you end up having to imagine where less parts go. And that's some of the problem. Again, obviously we've got the steering column and the steering rack down and off, and we have to kind of take that into account when we're mocking this kit up. So we want to remove the least amount of parts. That way we can ensure that it's going to fit the best. So the two stock turbos, obviously they're quite small because there's two of them, so they don't need to be half as big. The way the downpipes work, kind of move around an engine mount which sits here, and it all fits quite well. There's plenty of clearance over to the chassis leg here. We've got the stock electronic actuators on, and there's plenty of room for turbos of that size, and it's not really an issue. Obviously we've got to try and fit in a tubular manifold, 3-inch downpipes, much larger air intakes. The Garrett turbos have a 3-inch intake. The intakes on these turbos are tiny. I know that there are kind of aftermarket ones which are larger, but we're basically going to have two much bigger turbos in here. So if you kind of imagine what that looks like, and then when I take these out in a minute and put one of the Garrett turbos in, you'll see the kind of challenge we've got. Right, so we've got one of the stock turbos on the bench and one of the Garrett turbos. And obviously it's quite a bit bigger, that's part of the challenge. Not only that, as standard, the Garrett turbos are pneumatically controlled, pneumatic wastegate, and the BMW ones are electric. So we're going to have to adapt the electronic wastegate actuator onto the Garrett turbo. It's not going to be that hard to actually fit that onto there. Part of the challenge is going to be that, again, that actuator is so much bigger than a pneumatic actuator, and we're also fitting in two much bigger turbos. It becomes a bit of a challenge to basically cram it all in. how so this is the front turbo, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is the front one. And as you can see, like the gases come out of the manifold, down into the turbine housing, and then actually down and out. It's not the best in terms of flow, but it means they get the wastegate in there nicely. That sits in the top. It's perfectly designed to fit side by side with another turbo. As you can see, the intake of that turbo fits, you know, nicely up against each other. I mean, I'm not 100% sure if these are the right way around, but even if they're not, you know, you can kind of see how it works, that they're designed to sit next to each other. That one can easily sit in front of there, that one can go there. And the Garrett ones obviously aren't designed to work that way. They're air in, air out the back, and that gives us a bit of a challenge in that when you look at the width of that turbo, this turbo is wider than that one, and we've still got to get a whole exhaust downpipe out here, whereas this one's already coming down. So yeah, it's going to be a squeeze to get it all in there, but yeah, that's part of the challenge. So we'll throw one on the car in the engine bay and have a look at what kind of space we've got to work with. So it's already a bit of a squeeze getting it in there, but I was anticipating that. So we are going to want the front turbo to sit as far forward as possible, really, and that is going to be somewhere there, I would imagine. So in terms of overall width, obviously they're not quite a lot wider than the stock ones. It's just going to be that that downpipe for the front turbo that's going to cause us most of the problems. We're going to have to get the front turbo as far forward as we can get it, and the rear turbo as far backwards as we can get it, to allow us to have plenty of room for the downpipe of that front turbo. It's a similar issue to what we had with the Skyline, although on the Skyline I think you've got the advantage of being in a position where you can kind of modify the car a little bit more than you might normally want to. So on this, we're trying to keep all of the original fittings where we can as well. So we've got all the original oil return fittings, all the original oil feed fittings, coolant. We want to try and keep as much of that as possible. On the Skyline kit, that was more of a, it's a more accepted aftermarket part. We want this to be as much of a bolt-on part as possible. So there's quite a lot to think about. And the first thing really is going to be trying to set the turbos in a position where they're going to work. So kind of it's going to be a case of throwing a head flange on there, or two separate head flanges, getting a collector, getting a flange tacked on, and yeah, trying to set that turbo position. So that'll be the first thing we do in the next episode, I guess. So yeah, thanks for watching and keep your eyes peeled.